Close your eyes for a moment and picture the Middle East. What do you see? Desert, camels, ancient ruins, men in robes, conflict, religion, danger. Now ask yourself an honest question. Where did that image come from? Did it come from the actual people of the Middle East, their art, their music, their literature, their civilization? Or did it come from Western films, Western news, Western textbooks, and Western paintings that have been shaping your perception since before you were born? Because here is the uncomfortable truth that one of the most important intellectuals of the 20th century spent his life trying to make visible. The image of the East that most of us carry inside our minds was not created by the East. It was created by the West, for the West, to serve the West. And it is shaping far more than your geography knowledge. Welcome to Enter Self, where we explore the psychology behind how we see ourselves and our world. Today we are diving deep into one of the most important and least understood intellectual frameworks of the modern age, Orientalism. We will trace its historical origins, examine the factual mechanisms through which it operates, and explore its profound personal impact on how millions of people see themselves and each other today. This video is rooted in verified historical fact and academic research. It is not political, it is psychological. And by the end, you will never look at a Hollywood film, a news broadcast, or even your own assumptions the same way again. Part 1. Who was Edward Said and what did he discover? To understand Orientalism, we must begin with the man who named it. Edward Said was a Palestinian-American scholar, literary critic, and cultural theorist. Born in Mandatory Palestine and educated in British colonial schools and elite American universities, Said carried within him the lived experience of being simultaneously an insider and an outsider, someone educated in Western systems while being defined by those systems as other. In 1978, Said published a groundbreaking book simply called Orientalism, establishing the term as a critical concept to describe the Western world's depiction and portrayal of the Eastern world. Said argued that these representations were not mere reflections of reality, but served to reinforce Western imperial ideologies by depicting the East as exotic, mysterious, and often inferior. Said repeatedly underscored the importance of understanding the intimate relationship between knowledge and power, declaring that much of the Western study of Islamic civilization was a psychological exercise in the self-affirmation of European identity, rather than an objective exercise of intellectual inquiry. In other words, the West did not simply study the East, it invented it, and the invention served a purpose. Part 2. How it started, Napoleon's Egypt and the birth of Orientalism. To understand how Orientalism became a global force, we need to go back to a specific moment in history. The year is 1798. Napoleon Bonaparte embarks on a daring expedition to Egypt, aiming to disrupt British trade routes and establish French presence in the Middle East. But this was no ordinary military campaign. An unusual aspect of the Egyptian expedition was the inclusion of an enormous contingent of 167 scientists and scholars assigned to the invading French force: naturalists, surveyors, archaeologists, artists, and engineers. Their task was to study and document everything about Egypt. This deployment of intellectual resources alongside military force is considered by many historians as a masterstroke of propaganda, obfuscating the true motives of the invasion under the cover of Enlightenment scholarship. The result was the Description de l'Egypte, a monumental multi-volume document that catalogued Egyptian society, architecture and culture, but through an entirely French lens. Focused on ancient monuments, exotic imagery, and an Egypt that existed in the European imagination, not the living, breathing Egypt of 1798. Said himself wrote that with Napoleon's occupation of Egypt, processes were set in motion between East and West that still dominate our contemporary cultural and political perspectives to this day. This was the moment the template was set. knowledge and military power working together. The East studied, documented, categorized, and by the act of categorization, controlled. Part 3. The three mechanisms of Orientalism. Said identified three interconnected mechanisms through which Orientalism operates, and understanding them is key to understanding how this ideology still functions today. Mechanism 1. Essentialism. Orientalist thinking portrayed non-Western peoples as possessing a fixed and unchanging nature, incapable of the objectivity and rationality required for enlightened institutions like science, democracy, or representative governance. In the Orientalists telling people of the East were emotional, dishonest, and ruled by shame and honor rather than reason. This is essentialism, the belief that an entire diverse group of people, across hundreds of countries and thousands of years of history, share a single fixed nature. It is a reduction of extraordinary complexity into a convenient stereotype. Mechanism 2. Binary opposition. Said argued that the construction of identity in every age involves establishing opposites and others. The development of every culture requires the existence of a different and competing alter ego. Orientalism led the West to position itself as dynamic, rational, modern, and superior by constructing the East as its opposite static, irrational, exotic, and inferior. West equals civilization. East equals barbarism. West equals progress. East equals tradition. These binaries are not observations. They are constructions. And they have shaped global policy, cultural production, and personal psychology for over 2 centuries. Mechanism 3. Knowledge as power. Said argued that Orientalism was inextricably tied to the imperialist societies that produced it, making much Orientalist scholarship inherently political and servile to power. The West did not simply learn about the East, it used that knowledge to dominate, restructure, and claim authority over it. To know something in the Orientalist framework is to own it, to define it, to control the story of what it is and what it is worth. Part 4. Hollywood, where Orientalism became everyone's reality. If Orientalism began in academic texts and colonial scholarship, it was Hollywood that carried it into every living room on Earth. Researcher Jack Shaheen spent decades analyzing over 900 Hollywood films and concluded that Hollywood rendered the Middle East in exotic terms that stoked ill feeling, distrust, and loathing. He identified 5 most frequently occurring Arab stereotypes across Hollywood history: villains, sheikhs, dancing harem maidens, Egyptians, and Palestinians. Early Hollywood depicted Arab women as belly dancers and as property, sexualized and without agency. After World War II, as news coverage was permeated with the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Iranian Revolution, and the American hostage crisis, these depictions shifted. Arab women became either terrorists or submissive victims in need of Western rescue. In more recent Hollywood productions, this pattern continues. Arabs are portrayed as evil, or rich oil sheikhs, and most infamously, as terrorists after September 11th. In most forms of Western media, Arabs are portrayed in a negative light, often in stereotypical roles. Hollywood is understood to possess considerable soft power. This should not be underestimated, especially in light of the close relationship that has existed between the White House and Hollywood since the first studio was founded in 1911. The White House has called upon the services of Hollywood in times of war and crisis, including the declaration of the War on Terror in 2001. A 2017 study on the representation of MENA characters in Hollywood found that 92% of all scripted shows had absolutely no MENA representation at all. Among the few that did include these characters, 78% were portrayed as trained terrorists, agents, soldiers, or tyrants. This is not accident. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. a systemic, documented, centuries-old pattern of constructing a specific image of the East and distributing that image to billions of people as though it were truth. Part 5. Orientalism is not just about the Middle East. Here is something critical that is often missed in discussions of Orientalism. While Said's original framework focused on Western representations of the Middle East and North Africa, the mechanism he identified operates across every culture that has been positioned as other by dominant Western narrative, the infantilization of African cultures as primitive, the fetishization of Asian women as submissive and exotic, the romanticization of indigenous peoples as noble but backwards, the reduction of South Asian civilization to poverty and spirituality divorced from its scientific and intellectual achievements. Said himself argued that the construction of the Orient was not about the East at all. It had less to do with the Orient than it did with the Western world itself. It was a mirror in which the West constructed its own identity by defining everything it wished to see itself as not. This means Orientalism, as a psychological mechanism, touches every person who has ever been made to feel that their culture, their heritage, their way of being in the world was less sophisticated, less rational, less worthy than the Western standard. Which is a very large number of people indeed. Part 6. What this does to the human mind. And now we arrive at the most personal part of this conversation. Because the question is not just, what has Orientalism done to how others see the East? The deeper question is, what has it done to how people from the East see themselves? Immigrants and individuals from marginalized cultural groups often face profound identity crises as they navigate the dual pressures of preserving their heritage while conforming to societal expectations. This experience, referred to as acculturative stress, is associated with heightened risks of depression, anxiety, and other psychological disorders. The erasure of indigenous and local cultural knowledge exacerbates this alienation, leaving individuals from these cultures with limited access to care that resonates with their lived experiences. But beyond clinical symptoms, internalized Orientalism creates something more insidious. It creates self-doubt, a quiet, persistent belief that your authentic cultural self, your language, your traditions, your knowledge systems, your way of seeing the world, is somehow less. It creates code switching, the exhausting daily performance of becoming acceptable to a dominant culture at the expense of your own. It creates shame about things that carry no shame: your name, your food, your accent, your family's customs. And it creates what Edward Said described as the deepest wound of colonial thinking, the colonization not of land, but of the imagination. The moment a people begin to see themselves through their colonizers' eyes, that is not a political problem. That is a psychological wound, and it requires a psychological healing. Part 7. Reclaiming the narrative. So what does it mean to heal from this, personally, psychologically, practically? It begins with what Said called counter-narrative. The deliberate, conscious act of seeking out and centering the stories that Orientalism erased. Practically, this means consuming media made by the cultures being depicted, not just about them. Learning the actual history of civilizations that were reduced to stereotypes, the Islamic Golden Age that preserved and advanced Greek philosophy, mathematics and medicine during Europe's Dark Ages. The ancient trading empires of West Africa, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge of indigenous peoples across the Americas. The mathematical foundations laid by Indian scholars that underpin modern science. Said's emphasis on reclaiming cultural narratives points directly to what modern psychology confirms, that reclaiming cultural autonomy is essential for genuine psychological healing and well-being. It means questioning every assumption you carry about which cultures are sophisticated and which are primitive. Which knowledge systems are valid and which are superstition, which ways of being in the world are civilized and which are not. And it means, most personally of all, giving yourself permission to be fully, unapologetically, culturally yourself. Without editing, without translation, without apology. Edward Said died in 2003, but the questions he spent his life asking have never been more urgent. In a world where images travel at the speed of light, where a single algorithm shapes what billions of people see and believe, the mechanism Said identified in 1978 operates faster and more powerfully than ever. The images we consume shape the assumptions we carry, and the assumptions we carry shape how we see ourselves and each other. But here is what Orientalism could never fully erase, and what no system of representation, however powerful, can ultimately destroy. The actual richness of the civilizations it sought to simplify, the actual depth of the cultures it tried to flatten, the actual humanity of the people it reduced to stereotypes, that richness, that depth, that humanity, was always there. It is still there, and reclaiming it, personally, culturally, psychologically, is not just an intellectual exercise. It is one of the most profound acts of self-discovery available to us. Because you cannot truly know yourself if you are seeing yourself through someone else's story. If this video expanded how you see yourself and your world, share it with someone who needs to see it today. Subscribe to Enter Self. Every week we go deeper into the psychology of identity, culture, and self-discovery. Until next time, keep going inward. The truth of who you are is always richer than the story you were told.